Welcome, everyone, to the Religion Unplugged podcast, your one stop shop for all the best in religious news and culture. My name is Joseph Holmes. Our guest today is Joseph Josselyn. He is a director, producer, and cinematographer with the Deaf Missions Organization. He is a bachelor's in television from the Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., and has shepherded multiple projects from sitcom episodes to feature films to shorts through production and to release. His latest film, Jesus, a Deaf Missions film, is in theaters June 24th, which probably will be out by now, by the time the episode comes out. But Mr. Josselyn, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
So I guess the big question to first ask is, when did you first know you wanted to make movies? And what made you decide you wanted to make a movie about Jesus?
Yeah, so when I knew that I wanted to make movies, was as a kid. I grew up loving movies and film. I became deaf at the age of 2, and so I would access the world very visually. And when movies would be released at that time, I remember the original Star Wars when they would come out. I was so fascinated and drawn in with how they illustrated and made all of that behind the scenes work that was done to make the film in that process. I remember being a kid and already loving that, just always being a part of me. So that was just always something that was there. And I always had ideas and dreams about how to make movies and what that would look like. And in my professional life, I went to Gallaudet University and I had my student productions and other things like that. I worked for a few different companies before I joined Deaf Missions. And this is where my skills really just flourished. And to get to the point of the Jesus film, really, again, the idea of a film, this Jesus movie, being in American Sign Language was something that I wished my entire life for. We knew that Jesus of Nazareth was an old film from the 70s or 80s, sometimes back there, that I remember watching, and it had captions in English. And so I was having to go back and forth all the time to catch what they were saying because I was deaf. So I could watch the action, but then I had to miss some of it to watch the words and read it. So I would remember thinking, wow, if this was in sign, it'd be a lot easier. So I always had that in my head as a kid and growing up. And then a few years ago, after joining Deaf Missions, we started having some conversations about making a Jesus film. And at that time, it was probably 15 years ago, maybe, we weren't ready. Just the technology wasn't there. I don't think people were there. The resources, the knowledge, the need, the know-how, the budget, all of those things just weren't really accessible. So it wasn't something we could ever really actively pursue. And recently, Deaf Missions released the Book of Job, a few years ago. And that was really one of the first successes to see ASL in a movie format. And the deaf community really loved it. And there was a lot of excitement around it. So we had that conversation about whether we were ready. And we thought that we were. We met with someone named Michael, and his last name is Davis. He set up a company called Gum Vision Studios. And Michael is deaf. And so we had a very similar vision of how to produce this film and what the Jesus movie could look like. And felt like, okay, we think we're ready. We think this is time. And so I contacted my boss. His name is Chad Intinger. And Intinger, he's the CEO of Deaf Missions, and brought this idea and said, we think this is the next big project, is a Jesus film in American Sign Language. Not relying on captions. It has captions, but really the language being in sign language, and the captions are for the other people instead of the other way around. And we talked to him, and we talked about how much do you need and what would that budget be. And I went back to Michael and we did some calculating and figured out what we thought it could be. And we didn't want to ask too much because we're a donations based organization, nonprofit. And so we did, want to be careful what we were asking for. And we were just really working on the baseline of what we could get. And we went to Chad, and that was $4.8 million. And I remember Chad almost having his mouth open saying, I think I asked the wrong question when we came to him with that number. And the rest, though, is history. And here we are.
Yeah, no, there's so much in that story that I resonate with. As a Christian who also grew up really loving movies, I definitely resonate with, watching those movies as a kid and being blown away by them, the stories they told, and then saying, okay, I want to be involved in that, whatever that's doing to me and for me, what I'm feeling right now. I want other people to feel that way as well. I want to be involved in that. Then also being a Christian and wanting to say, hey, what I'm experiencing in my relationship with God and a church, I want people to experience that as well. But you've had that barrier where you've been, seeing, the movies, on screen, but you have that barrier of needing captions in order to see them. And then also you are part of the wider Christian community, but you don't always have, access to the stories of Jesus and the communication of how that's communicated with, in the ways that other people do. And bef- and so that's really fascinating in your story. And I want to get to some of that, but first and talk about the Jesus movie specifically. But first I want, for people who don't know, what is Deaf Missions? What's the organization more broadly?
Yeah. So Deaf Missions is a nonprofit organization, a Christian organization that was founded in 1970 by Dwayne King. And he had a vision to reach deaf people, specifically through visual materials and resources. I mean, you think back at that time that we were in 80 millimeter film, photos, slide projectors, books, and pamphlets. That was where the vision was at that time. But over time, Deaf Missions has now become really focused on producing high quality, high impact media, specifically through sign language and through film and video. That's really what our heart is focused on right now.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess that, like, what was the most important thing to you about Jesus to get across in a movie like this? I mean, Jesus is, easily, arguably the most famous, person in history. Pretty much everybody has heard of him, and there have been a lot of, and everybody has something that's important about him to them specifically. And so as you are making, kind of trying to tell Jesus's whole life in here, you have something. What was most important to get across about him to the audience?
Yeah. I mean, for me, the most important was to demonstrate his love for people, his love that he died on the cross to forgive us of our sins and to promise us eternal life, that his love and forgiveness and the gift that he gives us, that was the most important thing.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That would be in my top one as well. What was the biggest challenge that you found in, making, a Jesus movie that's all done in American Sign Language? I mean, I instantly, my mind goes to, is like, okay, you've got to find, you know actors who actually are good actors, who all know how to do American Sign Language, even if they aren't maybe deaf themselves. They all have to be able to do American Sign Language. But that's just the thing that comes to my mind instantly. What was for you some of the most difficult challenges in making the film?
So, some of those most difficult challenges, of course, there would be many of them. But I do want to talk about the deaf cast because all of the cast were deaf. All of the cast in the movie are deaf. There were no hearing actors on screen. We were very intentional about that because deaf people, it's their heart language. Whether you're born in a deaf family or whether you learn sign language in school, in deaf social environments like that, whether you were mainstreamed and you were the only deaf person and learned to sign later, it's something about our heart that comes across in sign language. And the challenge is it's hard to find that many actors because this film is the largest cast and production of deaf people that we know of. Over 25 deaf cast members. We had the disciples. We had the Pharisees and all of the religious leaders and all of the different people involved and all of the or the auxiliary characters as well. So it was a non-union production, which meant that we couldn't use SAG actors. Our budget wouldn't allow for that. And so that cut our pool of available talent down significantly. But we decided that we would hire people who were non-believers because the purpose of the film was to be for everybody. It's not just for Christians. We want it to go and speak to non-believing deaf people as well. So we wanted to portray that in the casting. And in order to have the quality actors, we have great actors, maybe not famous, amazing actors, but to find them was a challenge, and to go through several days of working with them. And it's really difficult to work in that time. And if they have a job that they're engaged in, how do they take time to come do something like this and to schedule around to make sure everybody's available and to be on location, all of those things. But God really helped cast this, and he really worked through the gentleman I mentioned earlier, Michael. He worked a lot on the casting. He was the casting director, and God just worked it all out.
That's awesome. What would you say were some of the most rewarding aspects of working on this project? I mean, that having the opportunity to do something, a Jesus film in American Sign Language entirely with an entirely deaf cast. Again, we talked about there's challenges to it, but there's also amazing opportunities for it as well. I know that, I don't want to spoil things for anybody, but there are certain, aspects of it that I was watching that I was even able to see that you're able to do things artistically with it and express different things when you're having it all be expressed through the hand gestures and sign language. Obviously, there's a I'm not going to spoil this, but there's a thing at the very end where you're very specifically doing a joke or that is only you could only do by doing something in sign language, which I thought was very great. But so what for you?
Exactly.
Yeah. What for you were some of the great opportunities that you got to have by doing this translation for the first time?
Well, I mean, the part that you're mentioning, we don't want to spoil it, and be careful with that for sure, because it is such an impactful part of the movie. But sign language is a beautiful language. And signing, we have to see that it is equivalent to spoken language, even though it's completely different in its structure, in the way that it's visually represented. It's nonlinear. And so one of the questions we had to ask was, how would Jesus sign while he was on the cross? We have, the account of Jesus and him speaking on the cross, and when your hands are physically nailed down, you couldn't do that. And that was a big part of our vision, was how to do that. And we've seen people that really cried in the way that it was portrayed. It's an incredibly touching moment. And for people to see that, specifically him on the cross, and for deaf people to know how that would feel to be restricted from that communication. It was a great team to be able to work through some of those challenges and to take those opportunities.
That's fantastic. Yeah, no, again, I'm impressed by how well this movie works, artistically, on your budget, on your limitations, how committed you were to making it like a really good film, and not just a ministry tool. So props on that. But one of the things I want to ask about is, because you are part of, you're filmmaker, you're making these movies, and you're also part of Deaf Missions, and you're part of deaf community. And I wanted to know, for people who are readers and listeners who are not deaf themselves, what would you say are the things that you would, want maybe hearing Christians to do to be helping make the church a more integrated place in terms of both the deaf community and the non-deaf community?
Well, I think, first of all, the Jesus film It was a lot of hard work. And like you said, we don't want it to be a ministry tool. We wanted it to be a high quality resource and a film, a feature production. And we really invested in our cast and wanted people to really see that we worked really hard. It was months of production. And we had to deal with weather delays and scheduling and all of those things. We worked and shot into the night. There were a lot of challenges that came with this, but we are all incredibly proud of the film that was made. And what we want people to understand, I do want to get to the point about the church, but specifically on the movie, that it really is for the deaf people and the deaf audience. That's really what we wanted to address. And we think that we've done that. It's not to exclude the hearing audience in any way, but it wasn't filmed with them in mind. We wanted to say, what would deaf people want to see to access this? For example, even when hearing people shoot videos with deaf people in them and deaf characters, you often see it pan away, or the framing cuts off their hands, or certain parts of the eye contact. And that means that as an actual deaf person watching a deaf person on screen, I don't get to see the entire message, and I still have to rely on captions. Other parts of it, for example, you might see a bird that's in the frame, and in a hearing film, you would have to have that captioned, but to a deaf person, does that really add any meaning? So we thought about, do we have a bird flying across the screen to make that visually shown what's in the background to the people? So when we talk about music and how that's used in the film, there are deaf people who do like music and can feel the beat and the bass or access it different ways, but we aren't going to depend on it like hearing people do. And that's a very large part of hearing media and film. So there were a lot of things we wanted to consider, bringing in, for example, some deaf musicians and hearing musicians as well to be part of this experience to make it really show the partnership with how to reach deaf people in their visual space and in their heart language and still make it successful. So how do you take all of that and put it into a church setting as well? I think it's really important for churches to understand that deaf people are the best people to reach deaf people, because we understand each other's experiences, each other's culture, and then, of course, the language. Now, it's kind of the idea of not being decided for. We want hearing people to come alongside and support deaf ministries and deaf missionaries and deaf-led organizations that are reaching their community. We want hearing people, and we need that partnership, but we need it partnered in how we're going to reach the community and not being done for us. I hope I answered the question.
You did. No, that was very good. That makes a lot of sense. What first? Again, I assume that the movie has you've had some test audiences for this. How has the movie been received so far? What have been some of the comments that you've gotten from it?
Yes, we have. So we had a red carpet event a couple of weeks ago, and that was our test audience, as you called it. And really, it was incredibly positive in the response. We looked out in the audience and people were moved, people cried, people were clearly showing their emotions. They said that they felt that they understood. They said that they didn't feel like they had any eye strain from watching a movie because they could just watch and it was smooth, and they weren't having to go back and forth around the video to access and understand and read and watch the physical presentation of the movie. The deaf community responded incredibly well. And of course, they appreciated the production value as well. And we had hearing people there who saw it as well and really enjoyed it and said that they weren't used to not having a voice to rely on in a movie, that they had to depend on captions. It was a different experience, but it also helped them to learn how to understand how deaf people are going to express themselves through visual means, through facial grammar and expressions and physical movement and body. And they even cried too. So it wasn't even something they couldn't access or understand and experience the same way.
Yeah, no, I think that's, Christianity is an interesting faith that I happen to be a part of, but because it does have this interesting balance between exclusivity and inclusiveness, where it's exclusive in its truth claims about what God is like and reality is like and who Jesus is, but it's supposed to be inclusive of giving everybody access to that. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about this movie is it more fully realizes that promise with movies than has been done before. So I'm really excited for what you're doing. So if this movie does well, do you guys have ideas about what comes next? What other movies that you'd like to do?
Right. So we like the idea of continuing to make other movies or films, possibly a series format, a TV series type of project. We would want to follow more of a modern drama type setting because to do such a large production with costuming and Bible settings was incredible. And it was a lot of headache. I mean, I'm losing my hair, and I think a good part of it was from the movie. But it feels like something that would be more applicable to the modern generation to help them grow in Jesus more. With the gospel of the Jesus film, what's needed next, I think, as far as spiritual discipleship and what is that way, and not just preaching and not just teaching, but really to help that experience grow and to use this in tandem.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, not even being someone part of the deaf community, but just being somebody who's, a Christian, being like, okay, what does being a Christian actually look like in the modern world, and what does discipleship look like? I don't get as many examples of that on screen myself as I would like in a high quality way, and so certainly the deaf community is not having that, and so that would be a fantastic thing to see. So I'm very excited for this movie. I'm very excited to for what comes next. So how can people support this film as it's rolling out?
Yes, we definitely need support, and there are ways that they can do it. The first one is come watch the movie. It releases on June 20th. It's going to be out on the 23rd as well in theaters. Most major cities are going to have them. We're in over 300 theaters all over the country. So that's the best way to support us right now is raise awareness, tell people about it. And the more that you attend, the more people we can get, as especially exposing people to the deaf community and deaf culture. That's going to be the best way and the most immediate way.
Fantastic. If people want to get in touch with you or Deaf Missions, or where can they go? Where is the best way to get in touch with you guys?
So they could always visit our website, which is jesusadeafmissionsfilm.com. And you can also find us on Facebook and Instagram.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so very much, sir. This has been a wonderful interview and experience. And thank you all for joining us today. We are the Religion Unplugged podcast, your one-stop shop for the best in religious news and culture.